Due to the ever-increasing incidence of cyber attacks on law firms, cyber liability insurance carriers are requiring more and more of your law firm in order to just simply bind coverage. And it's starting to come down to if you don't meet our requirements, you don't get covered. I can't blame insurance companies, I mean, they don't want to lose money. Nobody wants to lose money. But the simple fact is that too many law firms still to this day have to check no on the simplest of cyber protections on the application because they just want the measures in place, the simplest of them. But don't worry, me, Dave, and Vinny are here this week again to give you the information you need to be ready so that you can check the checkbox, yes, that you've got the simple protections in place. And most of them aren't asking for incredible amounts of protection. So, but first, before we get into this deep dive, I'm Jim Gast, and welcome back to No Law Firm Left Behind. Me, Dave, and Vinny are here weekly to help your law firm be more competitive, your staff and attorneys be more productive, all in an effort to help you get and keep clients, right? And so with me again today is Vinny and Dave. Guys, how you doing?
Doing great. How about yourself?
Good. Vinny, you doing well?
I'm doing well. Yes, I am.
Everybody, Dave is now in his new Cleveland posh law firm office because he is now practicing law again. Dave, congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Leave SpliceNet, but happy to see you transition into
where
you started.
And I still plan on staying part of the No Law Firm Left Behind process because, it's the legal side of things and the policy and procedure compliance stuff's really important. And so I think, we've got a lot to talk about there.
I think Vinny will agree with me. You've always been an invaluable resource to all of us. So
let's
get right to it, guys. Last week, we talked about a couple of things, how many records you have, how do you determine what types of records people are asking for. I've got the application that we're kind of working off of with me. And then how are we storing that information? And then what constitutes a cloud provider and what services could a cloud provider you be using of a cloud provider? This week, we're going to talk about 3 topics, and we'll start off with information and network security controls. Guys, the thing is that it says, do you use antivirus and a firewall to protect your network? That seems like a pretty simple and obvious yes, right? Wouldn't you say, guys?
Generally, that's sort of the bare minimum that you expect from most folks. And it's one of the things that people have been asking for years. Surprisingly, I still find places that are using technically firewalls, but sometimes they're just using the systems that are given to them by their internet service providers or something that they bought off a big box shelf without any consideration as to how secure that firewall really is.
Yeah.
I also found that in some cases, you're right, they're using a home router that they think is a firewall. And when we go to look at, let me see what firewall you have, they point to it and say, this is it. And it's really, they really don't know that it does have some very limited firewall capabilities, but it's not a true firewall.
It's definitely not appropriate for a business.
No, I'm going to say that if you have internet connection, you need a really decent firewall. We're not talking about the internet service provider's router, because that's all it is just a router. It's got a limited amount of security built into it, but I would not call it a firewall. So if you don't have something separate that's protecting your network from the internet that you went out and purchased, or you're leasing or renting from a managed service provider like us, then you would have to check no. But Dave, we've been down some roads before where we walked into some sizable law firms and they didn't have antivirus either.
So what I've found is oftentimes they'll have some sort of antivirus, something that's very basic, came pre-installed on their machine. And the bigger culprit there is they're not updating it. They're not keeping their antivirus definitions up to date. They're not keeping the applications up to date. I've seen many instances where somebody will have a free trial that came on a set of computers that they bought for their firm, and they didn't ever subscribe. And so now they've got an entire office with virus definitions that haven't been updated in 6 months.
Yep.
That's basically the equivalent of not having antivirus at all.
You could check yes. I mean, you could check yes. I mean, do you have a firewall and antivirus? Does Windows Defender count as antivirus?
I think that depends on who you talk to.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So
It's
let's
better.
move
Look,
on from
look,
that
look.
question.
Windows Defender is better than nothing.
Oh, it is, but
However, again, it comes down to what actually makes sense. And just having antivirus is not the same as having the right antivirus and having that right antivirus up to date.
Yeah, I was just going to add that is, I mean, even if you're just using Windows Defender, are updates being done to it?
Mm-hmm.
Or really any type of antivirus. Having that antivirus doesn't mean much if it's not being managed, if it's not being checked, if someone's not ensuring that it's staying on machines and not being taken off by the end user, so on and so forth.
That it's configured correctly, that it's actually set to proactively scan things before it goes, or whether it's just going to run a scan, at 3:00 in the morning, long after you've already gone and downloaded some malicious piece of software to your machine. Yeah. So there's a whole lot of configuration that goes into antivirus. It's in our opinion, you might be able to check a box, but you probably, by checking that box, not necessarily where you need to be.
Yeah, for sure. Let's get into the next part of that question. This is a good one. Do you encrypt all sensitive? There's no underline under the word all, but it's all sensitive and confidential information stored on your organization's systems and networks. Now, that is a yes and no, and there's a A and B part to that. But let's kind of talk about that, guys. All sensitive, you encrypt. Talk about encryption.
So let me get one thing out there real quick, and that is when we're talking about law firms in particular, sensitive information generally is going to be all your client information. Okay. There are other things outside of client information that are also sensitive. You might have employee information that has personally identifiable information, et cetera, et cetera. You might have other trade secrets, prospect lists, things like that. But let's just assume for the rest of this discussion that every bit of client data you have is sensitive. Okay. And so let's just take that as the baseline and start talking about what is encryption and what does it mean?
Yeah, I mean, there's different types of encryption that's necessary, right? I mean, data that's stored on a hard drive, that's one type, right? Data that's being transferred between locations, that's another type. Data that's stored in the cloud, that's another type, right? That's, encryption it basically scrambles it so that if somebody could get to it, they would need a key to unscramble it, right?
People always get surprised when I explain to them that you might have a password on your computer, okay? And that might prevent somebody from turning your computer on and logging into it as you. However, if I were to take that same computer, open it up, take the hard drive out, plug it into my computer, and you didn't have encryption, I could bypass your password and get to all your data without having to log in as you, period. That's where encryption really becomes critical. It also, the same concept applies when we take that physical aspect out of it. If somebody can manage to get a copy of the data, so they don't have the hard drive itself, but they have a copy of the contents, that's where that scrambling also comes into play. Just because you have a copy of all my files doesn't mean you're going to be able to get to them.
So it says, do you encrypt all sensitive and confidential information?
Answer is almost always no.
I almost always no. We walk into law firm after law firm, business after business.
And let me tell you where a lot of this actually happens. Okay. And Vinny, jump in whenever you want, because you see this even more than I do. A lot of times people believe that just because they have their data on a quote unquote modern document management solution, they assume that their stuff is secure and encrypted. And that's not really always the case. So Vinny, what does it take to actually secure a network, to actually encrypt all that big word, all that data?
Yeah, I was also going to add, people even believe that their data is encrypted just because it's in the cloud as well. Yeah, and you need to ensure that your provider does that type of thing to make sure, right? Let's start with the endpoints. You can use something like BitLocker on Windows, right, to encrypt that machine.
BitLocker is something that comes with Windows 10
Yeah.
on most systems.
So
Yeah,
one thing to kind of point out is that back in the day, encryption software was not something that was just readily and freely available. You had to go out and compare your different solutions and determine, can it do X, Y, and Z. Now with Windows 10, and I think, Jim or Vinny, if you could correct me if I'm wrong, isn't it every version of Windows 10? I mean, there really is no
I don't know.
distinction. It's available for everyone, isn't it?
So it is available to everyone. It depends on how you want to manage it, right? As an organization, you want to be able to manage it centrally and such. And you need business licenses, enterprise style licenses to do that, to manage it centrally through, because every time you encrypt a machine, it's going to have an encryption key that's tied specifically to that machine. If you lose that machine, you're in trouble. If you lose that key, you're in trouble, right?
Got it.
No getting it back.
And so, you need to have some type of central management for this type of stuff. You just don't want people willy-nilly encrypting their devices and you not having control over that.
Let me add on that, Vinny. Do not encrypt your own systems. Have your IT professionals do it. It's very important.
Yep. Yeah. And for the reason of if there's a problem, right? You want your IT guy to be able to recover things. You want your IT guy to be able to troubleshoot problems and go through the process with you for you, right?
Got it. But I think, but just to make sure, it's available. Most people out there should have endpoint encryption available to them.
Yes,
right?
that is correct.
At this point, yeah. I mean, hardly.
I mean, even for your mobile devices,
it's
right?
built into it. Yeah.
Right. There are ways to encrypt them. Even if people are bringing their own devices, there's a way to encrypt corporate data, right, on those devices, so that data is protected if they're using their own devices, and you don't want to encrypt everyone's personal devices. So the technology is out there, right? Another thing that's important is, how do you encrypt your servers, right? Servers are in use all day long. And people don't want to do it because they don't want the impact, or they think that there's going to be a huge slowdown, or, what if this or what if that, right? But there's a lot of folks that are now starting to require something called encryption at rest, right? So that if someone takes your hard drive or copies your virtual hard drive, and they take it off your premises, they steal it, whatever it is, right? That data is encrypted as well. Same concept as your laptops, same concept as your desktops, right? That data is encrypted so that no one can get to it that's unauthorized.
All right.
And sorry, do we need to move on? Because I wanted to make one point.
Go.
So on the endpoints, we typically don't see a whole lot of problem with that, because most people work with Windows every day and they get it that, we have to have the latest version of Windows. We have Windows 10. We have BitLocker. Good, great, wonderful. Where I've seen a lot of problems is when people are running server operating systems, which are older, tend to be supported longer, but don't necessarily have all the features. So you'll see a Windows, let's take, for example, 2012, not R2. And I believe that it's not capable of being encrypted, whereas 2012 R2 is
native.
And so sometimes these servers can sit out there and be aging, and then they don't have the ability to do this encryption. So just a little side point.
Couple of quick things we need to fly through these 2 points. There's a couple of other. If the answer is no to that, do we have compensating controls in place? And so if you say no to encryption, are our servers segregated? And are the servers that store segregation of servers that store sensitive and confidential information? Are they segregated? Are they off somewhere else where they're separate from everything else? Segregation is an interesting term. I'm sure it's up for interpretation, but I think what it means is physical or virtual separation of those servers that are holding that confidential information,
or both.
Yeah.
It can be both. Physically controlled. I think they're looking more for controls. What controls you have in place there?
Do we not? Do we have that information on servers that are intermixed, if you will, with sensitive and not confidential information, right? Publicly available. Second one, access control with roles-based assignments. That's an interesting one. Access control means that you don't, not just everybody has access to get to that data, and we have certain permissions set up on those. So, do we think we need to go into any further on that one?
No, I don't think so. Let's just leave it at this.
Yeah.
If you're lacking encryption in the first place, the likelihood that you've got these other compensating controls in place and set up appropriately, I'm not all that confident.
Definitely needs to be reviewed. Ransomware controls is our next big section. Okay. Um, they're saying pretty much if you say no to most of these, you're not going to get coverage, right? And
ransomware is the big thing today, and it's where a lot of the losses are coming from. So this is important.
Yeah. So, do you use two-factor authentication to secure remote access to your network, including any remote desktop connections? Somebody want to talk about two-factor authentication again? Some of the types of two-factor authentication?
Yep. So there's various ways you can do two-factor authentication. You can have an authenticator app on your phone. They have Microsoft Authenticator, Google, a variety of apps that you can get for. And basically, what it does is it gives you that 30-second code or 20-second code, whatever it is, that constantly cycles through, and it's connected to your logon service that you're using. There's text-based two-factor, and there's also email-based two-factor, which is the one I'd recommend the least. Definitely highly recommend the app-based two-factor authentications. Easiest to use, and probably less likely to get intercepted.
If you're going to use one thing, if you're going to use app-based two-factor authentication, pay attention to what your options are for migrating from one mobile device to another.
Yep, and I was just going to mention that a lot of these services now allow you to back up your configuration, right, to their systems. Like I use a system that allows me to back up, and so if I change my device, I can restore it. Microsoft Authenticator allows you to back up to your account when it's secured, and then you can restore it to a new device. So just requires a login typically, and you can back that data up. Otherwise, you have to reconfigure all your two-factor every time you change a device.
Which can be a nightmare.
And just to kind of circle back to the very beginning, two-factor authentication, you have a username, you have a password. Everybody has a username and password to every system in the world that they need to get into. The two-factor is a way for that person or organization to ensure you are who you say you are.
Yeah.
And you're authenticating it. Somebody just hasn't stolen your username and password.
Yeah, it's a separate form of validating who you are, and it's through that code, and that code changes. And typically, it's tied to a personal device that only you have access to.
And I think most people are familiar with the concept at this point because most of your secure logins, aka financial institutions, et cetera, are all requiring multi-factor authentication already. I think the important thing here to note is that for your workspace, your workplace, even in a smaller environment, two-factor authentication is available and affordable to implement. It's not a ridiculously expensive technology in order to use. So with insurance companies starting to say, hey, you need to have this, people need to understand, hey, it's really not as difficult as it was maybe even a year or two ago. You can deploy this stuff. You can have this stuff. You just got to talk to someone that knows how to do it.
Now, it says, do you use two-factor authentication to secure remote access to your email? I want to make that clear. Do you use two-factor authentication to secure remote access to your email? That doesn't mean at the desk in your office. It means on a mobile device or at home. So if somebody's trying to use it outside the confines of your normal working area and devices, is it secured by two-factor authentication? So I don't think we have to go into that again, guys. But basically, if somebody in another country is hacking my email, that's outside of my office, outside of my devices, are they going to get a two-factor prompt?
Right.
And by the way, a little tip here. If you get a two-factor prompt that you didn't do something on, it means somebody's got your username and password probably. Okay. Or trying to reset your password, right, guys? So don't allow a two-factor.
Yeah, don't ever approve a two-factor that you didn't initiate.
Right. Okay. And it goes into, do you use endpoint detection and response, EDR, or next-gen antivirus software? And it gives some very specifics, which I'll read them. There's a lot out there, but CrowdStrike, Cylance, Carbon Black, to secure all system endpoints, right? That's a big one, all. Now, Sophos is another one out there. There's a lot of them out there, right? So which one do you guys want to talk about, EDR and next-gen antivirus and how that works?
Vinny?
Yep. So this type of systems is looking for behaviors, and it's tying things together. Instead of just saying, hey, I have this list of bad actors or bad programs that I'm looking out for, it's looking at your computer and it's learning. It's using some intelligence to learn, hey, this Word application is acting a little bit weird. I'm going to flag it, right? And if it continues to act weird, then it will block it, right? So it's a system that's learning. It's a system that's adaptive, and it's really more a behavioral based. And some can even get complex where it's looking at firewall logs together with what's going on your computer, right? And then it's taking action there, and the two devices can work together: the firewall and the EDR or the next generation type of antivirus. So it's taking antivirus to the next level.
It's
one
not
of the
just looking for signatures of viruses and malware.
Yeah, one of the weaknesses of antivirus or normal traditional antivirus is that the signature file has to be updated in order for the application to recognize that new virus, right? So we had to change tactics on looking more at behavior and use intelligence, artificial intelligence, to be able to do that.
Take it to the next level and you go, and it doesn't say it on here, but I think it's worth mentioning. Take it to the next level and you're talking about an MDR, Managed Detection and Response organization, and like an Arctic Wolf. Yeah, sure, they may use EDR, they may use next-gen antivirus that they're not providing, but they're taking the logs of all these various systems and looking for behaviors, and then they're acting on it.
Yeah, okay. I think what you're mentioning there is the fact that we do behavioral analytics is what's so different. Instead of just waiting for somebody to get hit with a new attack, we're able to identify bad actions without knowing exactly what's driving the bad action. It's the ability to say something just doesn't pass the smell test.
I think the goal, by the way, and by the way, it's a pretty simple question. If you don't understand this, then you got to check no. But I think the goal of these EDRs, next-gen antiviruses, MDRs, is to really stop an attack in its tracks. Not necessarily stop the attack. Obviously, that's the goal, right? But to stop it as fast as possible because there's some weird stuff going on. So that's the secondary goal. Anyway, do you use an email filtering solution designed to prevent phishing and ransomware attacks in addition to any filtering solution provided by your email provider? So let's just take Microsoft 365. It's the simplest target, right, that we're talking about, okay? Microsoft 365 has a spam filter built into that. Dave, Vinny, would that apply to this question?
In my opinion, no.
Okay.
I agree, because the default filter doesn't really do the phishing protection and the high level malware protection. Right? There's an additional product that Microsoft has that probably would qualify for that. It's the Defender Advanced Threat Protection, and that's where, and now it even can include testing, which is I think one of the next questions on the list, right? I jumped ahead, Jim.
That's all right.
But yeah, you not only want to have that protection, right? You want to have the knowledge and the testing of that as well.
Yeah. So just because you have Microsoft 365, you are not necessarily protected.
And again, most of these additional protection services are not ridiculously expensive. They're minor add-ons.
I would also add,
or an upgrade to your license that includes it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, and that's what I mean. It's like you don't have to have this massive deployment nightmare, and you don't have to have these astronomical monthly costs associated with it. So a lot of these things that your insurance company are asking for are, a couple bucks per person per month, plus, a couple hours to configure.
And if you're really
not a big
interested,
deal.
and if you don't have Microsoft 365 and Office Defender isn't an option for you, then definitely a Mimecast, or there's a whole bunch of services out there that are third party to Gmail or whatever system you're using, even to your own on-premise email system.
Correct.
So, but again, Microsoft 365 based product, probably, in our opinion, not going to cut not going to get you a check of yes, if you ask us. Do you use data backup solution for all your critical data? And so obviously yes or no, right? Do you use data backup solution for all your critical data? Critical data is there, right? Non-critical data, they don't care about that. They care about the critical data. Are you using a data backup solution? Really fast, guys, because we want to get to the last question here. What is data backup? The forms of data backup and what you would recommend.
Vinny, I'll go. I have no problems with that.
Yeah.
I mean, just to keep it simple, there's definitely a lot of different varieties when it comes to data backup, right? You can back up on site, you can back up in the cloud, you can back up block level, file level. There's so many different types, right? The critical is, you can have systems that can virtualize your servers on site or not, right? There's a lot of different options out there. It's important that you back up your data. I don't think anybody's going to argue that.
We get this all the time. We back up to external hard drives and we swap them out.
Yeah, no. It's a backup. I mean, they can say yes, right? But it's not a good backup, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The reality of it is that when you get into backups, if you're looking at it as just backup, you have a much bigger problem on your hands. And the fact is that when you go in and you start pressing people and you say, okay, that's great, you have these backups. What kind of backup is it? Where is it at? Et cetera, et cetera. And then you start talking about, let's talk about a particular kind of disaster that could happen where you had to rely on this backup. And once you get past the simple, oops, I deleted a file, then people start to realize how weak their backup plans typically really are.
Yeah, and
there's
who's
a lot of
checking?
shortcomings in them.
And who's checking those backups on those hard drives, right? Who's validating that data is correct and that you can restore from that, and so on and so forth. All those things really are a fact. That's why I would say, you could check the box and say, yes, I am backing up, but does that really check your needs, or does that really meet the needs of recovering if there were a problem?
I would go so far as to say that if you don't have some system or some person actively reviewing and telling you that your backups are good based to X, Y, and Z standard, whatever that's agreed to, you shouldn't be marking yes on that question, in my opinion. Moving
on. How frequently does that backup run? Daily, weekly, monthly? That's an easy question to answer.
Yep.
Is your data segregated? Is your data backup solution segregated and or disconnected from your network in such a way to reduce or eliminate the risk of backup being compromised if a malware or ransomware attack that spreads throughout your network? So, offsite data, removing hard drives nightly, so on and so on, right? That applies.
Things like that. And there's other way more advanced technical discussions we could get into that are well beyond
hosting your offsite backup. If you don't have it essentially in a secondary place or disconnected from your network in some form or fashion, you cannot say yes to that. Offsite.
And if it's in the cloud and it's being put there through like a network share, because you can map cloud-based locations as local shares, that does not count.
It's got to be segregated. In other words, we have a backup job that replicates offsite, and then that backup job stops. That's
through something other than just the operating system. There has to be some other kind of API that's used.
Totally agree. And
or some type of other control.
Correct.
What's that again?
I said, or some type of other control. There have to be controls in place. The key is that it has to have controls in place so that users cannot get to that data, to that backup copy.
Yep.
Or threat actors.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna go through this. We only got a couple minutes left, guys. Yeah. Phishing controls. Do any of the following employees at your company complete social engineering training? Right, and there's two types: employees with financial and accounting responsibility. Yes or no? Employees without financial and accounting responsibilities, yes or no? Okay. And so that what that means, social engineering training, in short, guys, means phishing, fraud, so on and so forth, right?
Yep.
What scams and so on and so things of
Yep.
that nature. Hey,
The Amazon gift card scam, as well
oh
as the click on this link to reset your password scam,
yeah,
phishing effort.
yeah, and
And in my opinion, I think that the OBLIC's being very nice in that one, that they at least differentiate between financial and non-financial. I believe it's required for everybody, regardless of whether you have financial or non-financial
I
responsibility.
agree.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think this is so important, and people overlook this, or they say, our attorneys don't have time for this, our staff doesn't have time for this, but this is such an important thing to do. You're really raising the awareness level by doing this. You're making your users more savvy on what they should or shouldn't be doing on the web or in emails. This is something that you just cannot skim on.
Should, guys. I mean, at the
For the
top
time
level,
investment.
at the highest level of every law firm, CEOs, managing partners, other partners, right? Location partner, managing partners, right? Should they have to do phishing testing?
Absolutely.
I hate to say it, guys. I hate to say it. Yes.
And again, and I will say this just like I mentioned before on the advanced email filtering piece. Again, this is not an astronomical cost or an astronomical headache to deploy.
Or
to not have these things is
do it.
When what hits the fan, and somebody comes in and looks at what you were doing and realizes that you weren't implementing low cost, low difficulty solutions, what do you think that's going to do financially as well as reputationally?
Yeah.
So that's why, what OBLIC's asking for is not all that bad. No. These are very simple things that make big impacts.
By the way, I will add, I want to say that, Dave, I want to point this out. This is not an OBLIC question.
This is being asked. Given. I respond to vendor questionnaires on a regular basis. These very same questions are being asked.
Yeah,
but anytime you're looking at the data privacy laws that are coming out, these are the kinds of questions that are going to be looked at after a breach. This is baseline stuff.
They're just OBLIC is just reselling a product. The people that have the product are requiring this. Now, it says if you answer yes to those questions, does the social engineering training include phishing simulation? Phishing simulation is the essentially sending fake emails to your users to make sure that they don't fall for them, and that you can find out who the clickers, the people that fall for those phishing emails. So they're fake emails, right?
Right.
And so we want to find out who is falling prey to that.
I'd rather find out who's going to click based on an innocuous email than on one that's actually going to do damage.
Microsoft 365 Office Defender can do that. KnowBe4 can do that. There's a whole host of applications out there that can do this. And then finally, loss history, because we're running out of time, guys. We're already 3 minutes over. I'm going to just fly through these. Has anybody complained about identity theft or sued you about a data breach or theft of information? That's pretty straightforward. Have you been the subject of a government action or investigation proceeding regarding alleged violation of privacy laws or regulations? Have you broken any of the compliances and so on and so forth? PCI or so many out there, right? Have you notified any customers, clients, or third parties of security breaches or privacy breaches? That's, by the way, required of many states, that if you do have a breach of a certain type, that you have to notify the people that were potentially breached.
The people and potentially other organizations as well, based on the number and the type and et cetera.
Have you received any cyber extortion demands or threats? Well, Dave, I got one this morning, Vinny. I got one this morning, says your computer has been hacked. And we now control your computer, and if you don't give us Bitcoin, we will let everybody know what all your data is. That's a threat. It's a phishing email, but it's a threat, wouldn't you guys say?
Okay, I'm going to take a slightly different thing. In that case, I would consider that would not rise to the level of having to check that checkbox.
Good. I agree. It's silly.
Anybody can send you anything that threatens you with extortion.
Mhm.
The fact is whether or not there's any real
Credibility.
substance behind it.
Is
Yeah.
it a legitimate threat or not?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. If my computer pops up and all of a sudden all my files are inaccessible and somebody
That's
says
a little
that,
different.
now you've got a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah, the old. You can see I used your email to send this email. You
Oh,
know
yeah,
that.
yeah.
that's-
I have hacked your web camera and your web browser, and I have seen you've been doing inappropriate things. I'm going to send it to all your loved ones. That by itself is not the kind of thing that's going to force you to say yes on that.
But
question.
when your computer locks up and you get some kind of screen on it that says, "Hey, we've locked all your files. Send us a 5
That's
minute."
a very different thing. Yes.
That's a different one.
Yep.
Sustained unscheduled. Okay, here's some weird ones. I know, but we got to answer them. Sustained any unscheduled network outages or interruptions for any reason.
I hate this
hasn't?
question. This is the word. And I'm going to tell you this right now. This is not the only instance where this question is being asked. And it's the one question that drives me the most crazy out of all the ones that I see, because I believe that these kind of questions should always be qualified, that it should be material disruptions of critical business processes rather than just any outage.
I mean, but technically a power outage can make
that's
that
what I'm
happen.
trying to say. Yeah,
Which I think is a ridiculous thing that you would have to say yes to
a hard
on
drive.
an insurance. That's just my opinion.
You know,
I think that there should always, and one of the things that I think should happen here is I think more people asking this question should start putting in materiality qualifiers on here. You know, what actually is substantial. Don't just put a vague term
You
out there like
can-
that.
On this application, if you desire an indication outside of the program, please complete a claim supplemental form. So you could say, "Yeah, but," on
And I think that it's one of those things where you have to use common sense the way it's being asked right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is, in my opinion, probably the most challenging question that is being asked on that we've talked about in this session.
Let me hammer through these.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really hard. Sustain any property damage or business interruption losses as a result of a cyber attack. We've been down, we paid the ransom, and we're back is basically what they're trying to find out there. Okay. Sustain any losses due to wire transfer, telecommunication fraud, or phishing fraud. You went and bought Target gift cards. Now you're trying to get your money back. Okay. Or you transferred money from your IOTA to cover the prince over in whatever country, you know, for an escrow account, and they sent you a check, and now that check bounced, and you sent the money to somebody else, which happens more than you think. Don't just shrug these off. I've heard all of these examples happen this year to law firms we know of. Okay, do you or any person organized or any organization know of any security breach, privacy breach, so on and so forth, that could give rise to a claim, something that happened months ago, even would apply. In the past 3 years, and this is the last one, in the past 3 years, does any service provider, that's like us now. Dave, you're not in that us anymore, sorry. And you were in the last 3 years. So is any service provider with access to applicants' network or computer systems sustained an unscheduled network outage or interruption lasting longer than 4 hours? Now, we apply to that as a managed service provider, okay? The software that we use would most likely apply to that as well. Would you guys agree? Look at Kaseya.
Yeah, I mean, in certain circumstances, absolutely.
But I mean, I think this question is also a little bit way out there because, you know, what was the source of that outage, or what was the reason?
Well, again, you can ask a piece of paper that says, but
there's also, and Jim, if you could ask that question just one more time, because I don't recall, is there a knowledge requirement in there?
When you say knowledge requirement, what do you mean there, Dave?
Does it say to the best of our knowledge?
It says, let me read it verbatim. In the past 3 years, has any service provider with access to the applicant's network or computer systems sustained an unscheduled network outage or interruption lasting longer than 4 hours? That's one part. Then the next part, if yes, did the applicant experience an interruption in business as a result of such outage or interruption?
So generally, a question like that would more likely have a knowledge requirement, because our clients might not even know if our stuff goes down.
No, they wouldn't.
So it would be, and when I say ours, I'm still changing my language.
Yeah,
You're
cut off from that.
You know, so I think this is, again, the real meat of this one is whether or not there's an impact to the person that's applying for the insurance in this situation.
Yeah.
Let's say, for example, what would you guys say? Would Office 365 be a service provider?
They're a service provider for sure.
And if Office 365 went down for 8 hours and no email flowed for 8 hours, that would have a material impact on a customer, correct?
Sure could.
I think that's the obvious situation where you'd say, yes, we used Office 365. It was down for 8 hours. We had no email. Boom. You would have that explanation there.
And I think anybody who uses Microsoft 365 would have to check yes, because in the last year, we've had several long outages.
Sure.
Yep.
But then again, you get that extra piece of paper. You can say, but, and clarify.
Well, and again, as it is with most insurance stuff, disclose. If you're in doubt, disclose up front and tell them what's going on, because that's the better way to handle it than trying to say, I don't want to tell them about that. Because if you go, I don't want to tell them about that, then something happens, they come back and find out about it. Now you got a whole other thing.
Yeah, right. Well, guys, great topic. We're going to close out this series on the OBLIC application and what insurance providers, cyber liability insurance providers are requiring of law firms today. If you're not able to check yes on all these things, just put a message in the chat on any of the platforms in which you find this, or respond to us, or go to No Law Firm Left Behind on LinkedIn. But no matter what, be prepared, because this is coming down the pike. Vinny, Dave, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Thanks for having us.
Take care.
All right. Take care, everyone.
All right.